What is shaking, you guys? Welcome back to Let's Go Win podcast. You're here for a Tuesday tune-up, and we are in for a treat today. We have a gentleman here that has done some amazing work, and he even told me he had the most amazing thing happen in his life, and hopefully we'll get to share that with you. Brian Ahearn is a specialist in the science of influence and is a certified trainer in the Cialdini Method. I've been saying that last name wrong for years. So Cialdini Method. He is the chief influence officer at Influence People and has written several books on the topic of influence, including Influence People, Persuasive Selling, and The Influencer, Secrets to Success and Happiness. His work has been recognized as one of the top 100 influence books of all time. Brian, that's remarkable, brother, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. I've been looking forward to it.
Well, you and I connected just shortly, I guess about a year ago, and there was a lot of synergy. I love your energy. We connected on so many things, but your subject matter of influence, it's such an important word. I use it often, and I just love the work that you're doing. So I guess I'll start there. What led you to be in this amazing work of influence?
Well, I got lucky. I wasn't pursuing it. It found me when I was working for an insurance company and I was involved with sales training. A coworker handed a video of Dr. Cialdini presenting at Stanford. And this was back, I think, in 2003. And I was just fascinated by it because I recognized, first of all, the psychology was the underpinning of all selling. That's why some approaches work and why some don't. I really liked the fact that it was based on research. I'm an analytical person. I thought I can really get behind this because there's meat to it. And then the third thing that really drew me in was he kept talking about ethical influence, non-manipulative ways to move people to action. And that appealed to me because I like to believe I'm a good person. I want to do right by people. And so those three things were what really drew me into his work.
Yeah, that's a really interesting part, that saying that you just said, because an ethical way to move people to action. And again, when we talk about sales, so often you hear of, not manipulation, but, you're certainly getting them to move. And I think that's where people get this salesy, ooh, I don't like that. But the truth is, like you said, there's an ethical approach. There's a way to get people to move. So how do we go about that, brother? I mean, to me, life is sales. Everything we do is sales. So I love this concept, but how do we do it so we don't have that negative stereotype when it comes to the sales world?
Well, so there's three things that we talk about when we talk about being an ethical influencer. And the first is being truthful. It's not enough to tell the truth. You don't hide the truth either. Because if I were selling something to you, JM, and I withheld information that I knew would probably make a difference for you, and then you found out and said, hey, why didn't you tell me? My saying, well, you didn't ask is indefensible. So we not only tell the truth, we don't hide the truth. The second thing is we only use the psychological principles of influence when they're naturally available. So for example, scarcity is used all the time, right? And people will try to invoke it when there's nothing that's really scarce, but they just know that it'll grip people and make them want to make a decision. That's unethical. And then the third thing that is required is it's got to create a win-win situation. And I put it this way: good for you, good for me, then we're good to go. And I think if we hit all three of those criteria, we can feel comfortable with how we're interacting with other people.
This is obviously not popular when it comes to marketing, in terms of this is not how they typically go about it. And I'll just take the news, for instance. They're not exactly applying these principles. And I guess for Dr. Cialdini, I got to get used to saying this correctly. My goodness.
Yeah.
For him to bring this to light, what was that? Early 80s, if I remember, the first book that I read.
Yep.
He's obviously going against the grain a little bit, and it was such a huge success. I wonder how much, when you've talked to him, how much pushback was there early on when this work first came about?
Well, the interesting thing is that when he wrote it, he really wrote it from a defensive posture, because he says very upfront that he's always been a sucker, and he wondered why he always fell for the approaches of various salespeople's, marketers, etc. And so that was the genesis for him to study the social influence process. So with every chapter at the end, he talks about how to defend yourself if you think that this is being used unethically against you. So it's interesting then that in the evolution of the book over the course of time, marketers, salespeople like myself recognize right away this is the difference maker when it comes to getting people to say yes, visiting the store, making the sale, all of those things. So his book took a real turn in terms of who was actually consuming and then utilizing the information. Now, one of the things about Cialdini that I thought was so cool when I met him early on, I went out to Arizona, was going through the 2-day workshop, which I now teach, and I had dinner with him. And when he asked about how my company was utilizing his information, his eyes lit up, his smile got wide, he leaned into the table, and you could tell he was so intrigued by how people were taking his life's work and putting it into practice. And I said to myself, that's a guy I want to be associated with. So it's taken a different turn, but it's worked out very, very well for him. I think he sold more than 5 million copies now of his various editions of the book.
Yeah, that's a remarkable idea. And obviously now you've taken that baton and run with it, and 3 of your own books, working on number 4. I have to ask, when I say the word influence, I immediately, think of leadership. And that's probably because of John Maxwell always saying leadership is influence. And he's obviously influenced so much of my learning. But when you say the word influence, when I say that aloud, what really comes to your mind, Brian, where you think, I want people to know this about influence. I want them to understand this is how to build a great influence. This is how to maybe, walk about it in a authentic path and way.
Well, I think the first thing that they need to understand is what really is influence, at least in the way that I talk about it. And I use the words influence and persuasion pretty interchangeably. Aristotle defined persuasion this way. He said it was the art of getting somebody to do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do if you didn't ask. And if you think about that for a moment, getting somebody to do something that they're probably not going to do in the absence of your communication, that's what influence is about. That's what it means to persuade somebody. Now, changing how somebody thinks or feels about something might be the first step, but sometimes it's not even necessary. I mean, when you're raising kids and you tell your kid to clean the room, you don't really care sometimes if they think it's a good idea or how they feel about it, because you just want to influence their actions. You want the room clean. So my real emphasis when I talk about this is how can we use this psychology to hopefully change how people think and feel, but ultimately to move them to action. Because if I change how you think about something, but it doesn't lead to a change in action, then it really hasn't accomplished anything. And the insurance industry, which I came out of, huge problem with texting and driving. If I share with you, JM, or your listeners, information about the dangers of texting and driving, it will change how they think. But if they get in their car and they text and drive, we've not done anything to solve the problem. And so that's how I view this. And that's what I want people to understand, is it's about moving people to action.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because I coach on this frequently, and I think, and again, I've read some of the work that you guys are involved in, but emotion is obviously a big tie-in, I would think, to really get someone to move, to influence them. Like you said, texting and driving. If the example would be, if someone close to me was texting and driving and were to pass, I think I am obviously going to take that more seriously than just some stat.
Absolutely.
So yeah, go ahead, brother. It's more of a statement, maybe when it comes to this idea of moving people towards action. I think that's what we all want, whether that's as a leader, in sales, with our significant other, with our children. I mean, this applies in every area of our life.
Yeah, it's so certainly emotion drives much of how we ultimately behave. But I think people are also getting so conditioned to fear tactics and over the top things that they see very clearly, oh, you're just trying to get me to do something. And so what they end up doing is they resist, or there's that part of people that thinks, well, that's not me, right? Yeah, everybody else is a bad driver, but I'm a good driver and I can text and drive. I've been doing it for 20 years. All right, so they will deceive themselves on those things. But there's a lot of opportunity to use these principles of influence in ways that really bypass our conscious thinking, hit our subconscious, and drive our behavior. One example is social proof, or the principle of consensus. When we know that lots of people who are like us happen to be doing something, we are much more inclined to take that similar action. Now, it's interesting that sometimes people are surveyed beforehand and they'll be asked questions like, well, what do you think would have the most impact on your willingness to reduce your fuel consumption, your electricity, things like that? And people will talk about different marketing messages, financial incentives. Usually the lowest one that they rate is what my neighbors are doing. And then in actuality, it becomes what their neighbors are doing. So people don't always know what drives their behavior ultimately. And that's why it's really important for people who want to excel at influence to understand these principles and how to bring them into their communication in an ethical way.
That's pretty interesting. So we're talking now where you're getting to the mind, where there's subconscious, there's the prefrontal cortex, the conscious mind. And so some of the, not noise, maybe that's the wrong word, but some of the flashing lights that are right here, that's not actually driving our behavior, is kind of how I heard that.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, whether it be a societal feel, I'm lacking on the word right now, but societal, I guess, is what I would say. Not pressure, but certainly influence is there. That's really interesting to think. I think this is what's creating my movement, but in all reality, it's something that, whether I've been conditioned or I've observed, that is saying, oh no, this is actually what's making me move forward.
Yeah. I'll give you one funny example. The principle of reciprocity. I do something kind for you, you feel a natural inclination to want to do something for me. I was out with a group of people who I had worked with, went into the restroom at the restaurant. It was kind of a nice place. And so there's a guy sitting in there with the colognes and the mouthwash and all this stuff, and handing you towels. And he's got the little basket for tips. And it's uncomfortable for most people in that situation, because I'm like, I can wash my hands by myself. I don't need to tip somebody just because they handed me a towel. But I do end up tipping. So I leave and I'm back at the table and I'm talking to people about the situation. And there's this one hardcore New Yorker guy just saying how he hates when they do that and he never tips when they do that because it's a scam, blah, blah, blah. Later that night, I'm in the restroom. There's Chris and he tips, right? So he is making a show of the fact that he never does this, and then he does it. And so people don't always know what drives them to take the actions that they take. We will, in hindsight, try to ascribe a meaning to it, but that's only in hindsight. They don't know why they're doing what they're doing.
That's pretty interesting. So much is going on in your head at that moment. Do I tip? Why don't I tip? And I'm putting myself in that bathroom in that moment with that attendant, where I'm like, I tip based on it has nothing to do with their product. It always has everything to do with their interaction with me, or at least that's how I have perceived it, because I do base my tips off, were they friendly? Did we talk? Was there a genuine connection? Because if there's not, I don't need the cologne. Maybe I need a piece of gum, but I probably have one, or my wife does, when I come out of the restroom. So it's interesting how that does play. That's a really good real world example. But for me, I'll tell you, I do tip based on my interaction with that human being. I have no problem if they are not friendly, not tipping. That's how I base it, because this is not a requirement. So yeah, it's really interesting. I want to ask you, because we talked about replacing uncertainty with confidence. I think that's such a huge thing in today's world, to be able to replace uncertainty, because the unknown so often is where you see people uncomfortable. what are some tools or tricks or thoughts towards building that confidence to replace the uncertainty?
Well, so when you're interacting with somebody, whether you're a leader or a salesperson, look at three things initially. Building relationship or rapport, right? The more somebody knows you and likes you, the easier it is for them to say yes to you. Uh, there's a lot of people who may like you plenty well enough, but they're not sure what to do. That's where uncertainty comes in. And then the third thing that we talk about is motivating people to action, because sometimes people like you, they know what to do, but they're just dragging their feet. And so we talk about different principles to move through that process. When we talk about helping people get beyond an uncertain state, going back to social proof, if I know that there are a lot of people who are very similar to me that are benefiting from what's being proposed, I am more inclined to think, well, if it's working for them, well, then certainly it'll work for me. And all of your listeners and all the people who are watching this engage in it almost daily when they look at reviews on Amazon. We are wanting to understand, how are other people feeling about this book, this music, this other product. So we're almost so conditioned by it that we don't even like consciously think. We just, boom, we go over to Amazon and we check out reviews. The other thing is authority. When somebody in a position of authority, someone we view as an expert, is giving us advice, we are much more inclined to follow the lead of that person than somebody else. And here's another real world example. My wife is an awesome golfer. That wasn't always the case. She used to be 100, 110 golfer, but she routinely shoots in the 70s and actually broke par last year for the first time. Well, many years ago, I'd come home from a sales training event, and I'm sure that you've heard this, JM, about focus, right? If you're playing golf and there's water on the right, you don't go in the water, right? You need to focus on what you want to do. So I had this conversation with her, sharing this golf example that I had used in some sales training. Weeks go by, she's reading a book about golf, and she says, listen to what Corey Pavin says. And she reads this paragraph. It's almost exactly what I had told her. So I said, I told you that. And she goes, no, you didn't. I'm like, yeah, a couple of weeks ago. Remember when we were having dinner? No. I'm like, are you kidding? I recounted the exact meal that we had. She had no clue. And finally I go, oh, if Corey Pavin says it, it's true. But when I say it, it's not. But here's the reality for people who don't know who Corey Pavin is. He won the US Open in 1995. He was the number 2 ranked golfer in the world at that time. So who are you going to believe? Corey Pavin, US Open winner, or Brian Ahearn, occasional golfer, double bogey at best, right? But here's the thing. What I said was 100% every bit as true as what he wrote on the pages of that book. But I wasn't believed because I wasn't viewed as an authority by my wife in that area. So it's critical for people to make sure that they are getting their credentials in front of them, that they are citing their sources, that they're doing whatever they can to get someone to realize, oh, this person is an expert. I should listen to what they have to say. And if we can combine authority and social proof, it's a powerful 1-2 punch to get people to move beyond that state where they're just not sure what to do.
Yeah, that's I can recount. I can't tell you how many countless times, very similar, coming from the sales world myself, saying similar things, but that makes a ton of sense. The whole idea of, I'm thinking, as you said it, feel, felt, found, right? Literally, I understand how you feel. I had a lot of clients that felt the same way you did. Here's what we found, because people don't like being alone and thinking that they don't want to be out all on. They like to be in the herd. So that's where that comes from, right? Is just that idea of feeling safe, that, okay, other people have done this. I'm in a safe spot now.
Bingo. When I do sales training, we talk about feel, felt, found, but I want people to understand psychologically why it works. I don't want them to be a bunch of robots going around to clients. I understand how you feel because others have felt the same way, however, what they found. Once you understand what the psychology is, and then you start to internalize it so that the words are your own. And so maybe it comes out as, yeah, I get it, Jam. I get where you're coming from. This isn't the first time that I've done this. And, other clients, when we've had these conversations, they felt the same way. But I can assure you, I said the same thing there, but it was just Brian Ahearn's words rather than the robotic, I understand how you feel kind of thing. So this is why I think salespeople especially need to understand this. And more than anybody, salespeople appreciate it, because when they put it into practice and they make more sales, you know, success tends to beget more success. They want to come back and learn more because they recognize how much more effective they can be by employing the psychology.
Yeah, and one of the things that being authentic is obviously a huge part of what my show, my program is all about. And people see right through that, don't they, Brian? If you're not being your genuine, authentic self, but rather just saying some script, that's why, as salespeople, you have to say that script so many times and make it yours, because they'll see right through the robotic stuff. They will see that you just read verbatim from a sheet, basically. But if you make it your own now, as a consumer, as a, whatever relationship we're in, okay, this is Brian saying this. And so people see right through if you're not being authentic.
Absolutely. And I do encourage people to take it, internalize it, and practice it. I see, when you're driving to and from work, going to see clients, just out loud, you begin to practice so that it becomes second nature for how you're going to utilize your own words, but the psychology at the same time. The other thing that I think is so helpful for people when it comes to authenticity is invoking the principle of liking. And I mentioned it earlier. We all know that it's easier to say yes to people that we like. But the key, JM, is not that I try to get you to like me. It's that I would do everything I can to like you. I will look for what we have in common. I will look at what I can genuinely compliment or how we could work together. But I am doing this from the point of view that I want to get to know and like you, because selfishly, I want to like the people I work with. But what ends up paying the benefits is when you sense, hey, that guy Brian, he really does care for me. That's what opens you up. Because deep down, we all want to believe that friends do right by friends. And because I am getting to know you and considering you friend, I do want to do right. And so we've built this virtuous cycle. That's where I think authenticity really starts.
Yeah, and I want to give a real world example because, again, you and I had a little bit of a previous relationship. So when we first got on this, we are going back and forth. I said, "Hey, man, how was your year?" And you said it was the best year. And I said, "Well, why?" And what did you say, Brian? Because I think this is where I want people to tie this in, because it was such a relatable thing immediately.
I told you that my daughter got married in June, and literally it was the best day of my life, and probably will be until that time when she has that first grandchild. It was a coming together of so much to see our only child, a daughter, walk down the aisle and understanding what marriage is all about. It was just incredible. And to celebrate with so many friends and family, it was just amazing.
Now, I want people to understand now Brian is more than just an expert on influence and a guy that's written 3 books and come from the corporate world. He now became this human with a daughter that got married, and he was so vulnerable to say the greatest thing in my life happened. I want people to understand how powerful that is, Brian, because again, we had a good synergy, but the moment you said it as a father, I was like, oh, that is amazing. And it just immediately bonded us that much faster. And it's just one of those things in sales. You weren't trying to sell me anything. It was rather you just being your authentic self. I say that just to tie it all together because I think it's so important. Brother, I can't believe I'm looking at the clock. It's already 23 minutes. We could go on forever on the subject. I want to just give you open forum. Anything else you want to talk about specific to influence and ethical influence and just the work that you're doing? Because I think it's really, really cool.
Well, the thing I want to encourage people is you are using the skill of influence every day. And you were using it before you ever knew what it was. The moment that a child comes into the world, that baby cries because it has a need, and it can't say, hey, mom, dad, feed me, burp me, change me. So parents have to figure that out. But the baby has a need. It's doing what it can to communicate to try to get its needs met. And then we learn language and we learn other things, but we are using the skill of influence every day. I say womb to tomb, 24/7, 365. And your ability to succeed as a leader, as a salesperson, just as a good human being depends so much on your ability to move people to say yes and take action. So understanding that, it's worth your time and effort to find out, how can I do this to the best of my ability? You don't have to go back to college for it. There are lots of resources online, my books, Cialdini's books, podcasts and things, but dive into it a little bit so that you will sharpen your own skills and you can enjoy more success at the office. And I think it leads to happiness at home as well.
Yeah, it's really well put, brother. If our listeners wanted to connect more with what you're doing, Brian, with your work, with Cialdini's, now that I know how to actually pronounce it, I've been saying it wrong for 20 some odd years. My goodness. But if they wanted to connect with you, Brian, where's the best place for them to do it online?
Best place would be LinkedIn. And so if you reach out to me, you will get a personal response. If you don't put a message about that you heard me on the show today, guaranteed I will ask you how you found me, because I like to know why people are reaching out. But I think it's called social media for a reason. We should be social. So if you reach out, we'll connect. I post a lot of content, so you'll be able to see that. The other place would be my website, which is influencepeople.biz. Been blogging for 15 years, been on more than 150 podcasts and numerous videos and things. There's just so much information out there if you want to dive deeper.
Well, I certainly hope people do, brother, because I love what you're doing. You are just that genuine, really neat guy. And I know you're working on that 4th book, and I'm excited to see that product come out because it's a really neat one that you're working on about your dad. So, brother, just thank you for the time and coming on.
Hey, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Guys, sales is life. I truly believe that everything that we do, and there's a way to feel great about it. This ethical influence. Again, Cialdini, he did this work back in the 80s, wrote another one. Now Brian is taking that baton and running with it. There's so much to dive into, but influence, you are doing it every single day. Let's get that much better at it. Until next time, remember, your mindset matters. I appreciate you all. Share this. Everyone is a part of influence. Influence others to be better. Share this out with them. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much for listening. If this content is delivering value to you, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review us. That helps us build this community, and that is what we are all about. Building this community as big as we can, helping as many people as we can, and deliver as much value as possible. Be sure to head over to letsgowinpodcast.com for information on my coaching courses, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Let's Go Win 365. Let's go win and transcend in life.
This is the Let's Go Win podcast with your host, J.M. Ryerson.